Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. Eric trudged up the stairs, the weight of his school backpack nothing compared to the heaviness in his heart. He pushed open the door to the silent apartment, greeted only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Dad wasn't home yet, as usual. He dropped his bag with a sigh and made his way to the kitchen, pulling out a box of pasta and a jar of sauce. The motions were automatic now. Fill the pot, salt the water, wait for boiling. As steam started to rise, he found himself staring blankly at the backsplash tiles, mind wandering. 5 years. Had it really been that long since Mom died? Some days the pain still felt as raw as when he'd first gotten the news. Eric swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in his eyes. He missed her warm smile, the way she'd ruffle his hair when he did well on a test, the little notes she'd tuck into his lunchbox. Now it was just him and Dad. 2 planets orbiting the same lonely star, barely exchanging more than a few words over breakfast. Eric knew his dad was hurting too, throwing himself into work to numb the grief. But he couldn't help but feel abandoned sometimes, left alone to figure out how to keep their fragments of a household running. The pasta water bubbled over, hissing as it hit the burner. Eric quickly turned the heat down and dumped in the noodles. He gave them a distracted stir. Cooking had never been his favorite chore, but it beat having to survive on takeout and frozen dinners. Someone had to make sure they were eating halfway decently. Eric had taken it upon himself to learn a few basic recipes, poring over Mom's old cookbooks and food blog bookmarks. He wasn't great at it, but he was trying, along with the laundry, the vacuuming, the dusting, all the things Mom used to do to keep their home running smoothly. Well, as smoothly as possible for a single mom. The oven timer buzzed, and he pulled out the garlic bread, nearly dropping the hot tray. He set it aside to cool and drained the pasta, tossing it with the heated sauce. 2 plates, 2 forks. Eric glanced at the clock. 7:15 p.m. He'd give Dad until 7:30 before wrapping up his plate for later. As he waited, he found himself planning out his chores for the next day. Whites needed to be washed. They were almost out of clean towels. The bathroom could use a scrubbing, too. Eric sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on his narrow shoulders. It was a lot for a 16-year-old boy. Boy. The word felt wrong somehow, like an itchy sweater he couldn't shrug off. Eric stared down at his hands, turning them over. Long, tapered fingers, delicate wrists. He wondered how they'd look with a coat of pale pink polish. He shook his head sharply. What was wrong with him? Boys didn't wear nail polish. And yet, the thought lingered, along with other forbidden wonderings. Like how it might feel to slip into one of Mom's old dresses, to let soft, flowy fabric swish around smooth legs, to see an hourglass figure in the mirror, hints of curves in all the right places. Eric's stomach clenched. He shouldn't be thinking those things. He was a boy, damn it. Just because he cooked and cleaned didn't make him any less of one. Then why did it feel like he was play-acting a role he'd never auditioned for? Trying to navigate a foreign script of masculinity that left him feeling tongue-tied and hollow? He swallowed hard. This wasn't the first time such thoughts had crept in, tiny seeds of doubt taking root. At first, he'd tried to ignore them, to lock them away as shameful secrets never to see the light. But like weeds, they kept springing back, stronger than before, choking out any sense of certainty about who and what he was. The front door clicked open and Eric stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. His dad walked in, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Hey, Dad," Eric said, trying to steady his voice. "I made spaghetti and garlic bread. Want me to heat you up a plate?" His dad blinked at him as if only just registering his presence. "Oh, no, that's all right. I ate at the office. Probably should have texted you." "No worries." Eric pasted on a smile he didn't feel. "I'll just put the leftovers in the fridge." "Thanks, bud." His dad clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder.
"Don't know what I'd do without you keeping things running around here."
The praise, so rarely given, should have sparked warmth in his chest. Instead, Eric felt only guilt. If his dad knew the strange thoughts swirling inside him, the wrongness coiled in his guts, would he still be grateful? Or would he look at Eric like he was a stranger? A freak? Well, I'm beat, his dad continued, oblivious to Eric's turmoil. Gonna hit the sack early. You okay to finish the dishes and lock up? Yeah, of course, Eric replied automatically. The words tasted like sawdust. That's my boy. Night, Eric. His dad trudged off to his bedroom without a backwards glance. The soft click of the door shutting sounded like a boom. Eric gripped the countertop, bowing his head. Silent tears splattered against the formica. He didn't feel like any kind of boy at all. But if not that, then what was he? The question haunted him as he mechanically packed away leftovers, rinsed plates, wiped down the table. By the time he fell into a fitful sleep, he was no closer to an answer, only an endless swirl of shame and confusion and a desperate prayer that tomorrow, somehow, he'd wake up and feel right. But deep down, he knew it was futile. This wasn't something a good night's sleep could fix. Eric was lost, adrift in uncharted waters, and he had no idea how to find his way to shore. The next morning, Eric woke with gritty eyes and a heavy heart. He dragged himself out of bed, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. Another day of pretending, of going through the motions. He sighed. In the bathroom, he splashed cold water on his face, avoiding his reflection. He didn't want to see the confusion staring back at him. As he brushed his teeth, his gaze snagged on his mom's old makeup bag sitting on the counter. A relic from better days. Slowly, he unzipped it, revealing neat rows of lipsticks, eyeshadows, and powders. He ran a finger over the labels, the unfamiliar names like a foreign language. His heart thumped harder. Before he could second-guess himself, Eric plucked out a tube of mascara. He unscrewed the cap, studying the spiky brush. How hard could it be? He leaned close to the mirror, holding his breath as he swiped the wand over his lashes. It took a few clumsy tries, but soon they were coated in inky black, looking thicker and longer. Eric blinked at his reflection. The difference was subtle, but it made something flicker in his chest. A tiny ember of rightness. He carefully applied some pale pink lip gloss, trying not to get it on his teeth. The boy in the mirror was still there, but now there was a softness to his features, a hint of the girl inside peeking out. Eric's stomach swooped even as his cheeks heated. He jumped at a sharp knock on the door. Eric, you almost done in there? I need to grab a quick shower before work. Yeah, just a minute, Eric called back, pulse pounding. He hurriedly stashed the makeup away, splashing water on his face to hide the evidence. By the time he opened the door, his dad was waiting with a frown. What took you so long? We've talked about this, Eric. You gotta be more considerate of other people's time. Sorry, Eric mumbled, ducking his head so his dad wouldn't see his still damp lashes. He quickly dressed for school, trying not to dwell on the foreign giddy flutter in his stomach. It was just a little makeup, nothing to get worked up about. And yet, as he went through his day, he found himself hyper-aware of his subtly altered appearance. Did his eyes look brighter? His lips pinker? Could everyone tell he was wearing makeup? That he'd stepped outside the lines of how a boy was supposed to look? No one said anything, not even his closest friends. But Eric still felt like he was harboring a secret, one that could unravel everything if discovered. Guilt and fear and longing tangled inside him until he could barely focus on his classes. It was a relief to finally escape to the bathroom during lunch, where he could splash water on his burning face and take a few deep breaths. He gripped the sink, staring at the dripping boy in the mirror. What was he doing? Playing with makeup, entertaining impossible fantasies? It was stupid, reckless. He needed to get a grip, focus on being the son his dad needed, the responsible man of the house. Eric straightened up, grabbing a rough brown paper towel to dry his face and hands. He winced as it scraped his skin, so different from the plush hand towels his mom used to buy. His mom. What would she think, seeing him like this? Would disappointment cloud her warm brown eyes? Or would understanding soften them? He swallowed hard. He'd never know, and that ache was worse than the sting of the cheap paper towel. Eric crumpled it in his fist and tossed it in the trash. Eric took a deep breath and walked into the living room, his heart pounding. His dad sat in his recliner, beer in hand, watching the nightly news. It was now or never. "Dad, can we talk?" Eric's voice wavered slightly. His dad looked up, brow furrowed. "Sure, bud. What's on your mind?" Eric perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly in his lap. He fought the urge to bolt, to keep this secret locked away forever. But it was eating him alive. "There's something I need to tell you," he started, mouth dry. "Something I've been struggling with for a while." His dad set his beer down, giving Eric his full attention. "Okay, I'm listening." Eric swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Dad, I think I might be transgender." Silence. His dad stared at him, uncomprehending. What? What are you talking about?" "Transgender," Eric repeated, voice shaking. "It means I don't feel like a boy. Inside, I feel like a girl." His dad's face went slack with shock. He opened and closed his mouth a few times, struggling for words. "Is this some kind of joke?" Eric shook his head miserably. "No, Dad, it's not a joke. It's how I feel." His dad abruptly stood up, pacing the room. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, agitated. "I don't understand. You've always been a boy, my son. Where is this coming from?" Tears pricked at Eric's eyes. He'd known this would be hard, but facing his dad's confusion and disbelief was worse than he'd imagined. "It's not coming from anywhere," he tried to explain. "It's just who I am, who I've always been, even if I didn't have the words for it." His dad whirled to face him, face reddening. "Is this because of your mother? Because she's not here? Damn it, Eric, I know I haven't been the perfect father, but I'm doing my best." Eric flinched. "This has nothing to do with Mom or with you. This is about me trying to be honest about who I am." "And who is that exactly? Because the kid I raised was a boy through and through. I changed your diapers for Christ's sake. I think I would know if my own son was really a... He trailed off, apparently unable to say the word. Eric's stomach twisted. "I'm still the same person," he whispered. "I'm still your child. That hasn't changed." "Hasn't it?" His dad threw up his hands. "You drop this bombshell on me and expect me to just roll with it? I don't even know what transgender really means." "I can explain," Eric offered, fighting to keep his voice steady. "There's websites, support groups, information." "I don't want information." His dad cut him off brusquely. "I want my son back. My normal, well-adjusted boy who doesn't spring something like this on me out of the blue." The words stung like a slap. Eric recoiled, blinking back tears. "I'm still your son in every way that matters," he said hoarsely. "And I'm still normal. Being transgender doesn't change that." His dad just shook his head, a muscle jumping in his jaw. He looked lost, a rudderless ship adrift in a storm. "I can't deal with this right now," he muttered. He grabbed his keys off the hook by the door. Eric jumped to his feet, panic fluttering in his throat. "Where are you going?" he asked, hating the way his voice cracked. "Out!" His dad yanked on his coat. "I need to clear my head. Don't wait up." And with that, he was gone, slamming the door behind him. Eric sank back onto the couch, a sob hitching in his chest. He curled up into a tight ball, hot tears leaking down his cheeks. This was exactly what he'd feared. His dad rejecting him, unable to accept his identity. The disgust and disbelief on his face was seared into Eric's mind. Would he ever be able to unsee it? Eric cried until his head pounded and his throat was raw. Eventually, the tears dried up, leaving him feeling scraped out and hollow. He dragged himself to bed, not bothering to brush his teeth or wash his face. What was the point? He fell into a restless sleep, plagued by dreams of his dad's retreating back. No matter how much he cried out or reached for him, he never turned around. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the blinds. Eric groaned and rolled over, his head fuzzy and eyes gritty. For a blissful moment, he forgot the events of last night. Then it all came rushing back, the terrifying confession, his dad's anger and bewilderment, the slamming door. Eric's stomach clenched. He lay there, staring blankly at the wall. Part of him wanted to stay in bed forever, to burrow under the covers and hide from the world. But he knew he couldn't. He had school, responsibilities, a role to play, even if it was the wrong one. Mechanically, he forced himself up and into the bathroom. He splashed water on his blotchy face and brushed his teeth, avoiding his reflection. The sight of his wet lashes and pink lips from yesterday seemed to mock him now. What had he been thinking? Experimenting with makeup? Entertaining impossible dreams of being seen as a girl? He'd been fooling himself, and now his dad knew it too. Shame burned in his gut as he dressed, pulling on jeans and a hoodie. He felt disconnected from his body, like he was a puppet and someone else was pulling the strings, going through the motions. He crept downstairs, half dreading facing his dad, but the living room was empty, coffee pot cold. No sign of his dad's coat or keys. Eric frowned. Had he slept at the office? Crashed at a friend's place? The thought made something twist painfully in Eric's chest. Was his dad that disgusted by him, that he couldn't even stand to come home? Blinking back fresh tears, Eric choked down some cereal and headed to the bus stop. He kept his head down, shoulders hunched, trying to take up as little space as possible. If he could disappear completely, he would. At school, he drifted from class to class in a daze. He couldn't focus on the lessons, too consumed with replaying last night over and over in his head. The shock and revulsion on his dad's face, the way he'd turned his back and walked out. Eric felt numb, like his insides had been scooped out with a rusty knife. He'd lost his mom, and now it seemed he might lose his dad too. All because he couldn't just be normal, couldn't be satisfied with the skin he was born in. What was wrong with him? Why couldn't he just accept being a boy, even if it never quite fit? Plenty of guys were sensitive, creative, in touch with their feelings. It didn't make them any less men. But Eric knew, deep down, that this was different. It wasn't about hobbies or personality traits. It was about a fundamental disconnect between mind and body, an intrinsic wrongness that seeped into his bones. He'd been grappling with it for years, shoving it down out of shame and confusion. But now that the truth had been spoken aloud, he couldn't stuff it back in. The girl inside was awake, blinking in the harsh light after a long slumber. And however much Eric wished he couldn't lull her back to sleep. She was part of him, as vital as breathing. Denying her was like holding his breath. It left him lightheaded and desperate for air. But how could he live as her when the very idea made his own father turn away in disgust? When the world saw her as a freak, a walking punchline? Eric felt trapped, suffocated by expectation. The day passed in a blur of worried faces and white noise. His friends kept shooting him concerned looks, but he brushed off their questions. How could he even begin to explain? By the time the last bell rang, Eric's head was pounding and his nerves were fried. He dreaded going home to a dark, empty house, to the stony silence of his dad's absence. He was so lost in thought he didn't notice the person approaching him until they tapped him on the shoulder. Eric flinched, whirling around. It was Mia, a quiet girl from his English class. She had dyed black hair and intense eyes rimmed with kohl. They'd spoken a handful of times, bonding over shared tastes in music and art. "Hey," Mia said, giving him a small smile. "I don't mean to bother you, but are you okay? You seemed really out of it today." Eric opened his mouth, ready to deliver the standard "I'm fine" brush-off. But something in Mia's eyes stopped him. A softness, an understanding. "Not really," he admitted, voice cracking. "I'm kind of going through something." Mia's brow furrowed. "Do you want to talk about it? I'm a pretty good listener." Panic constricted Eric's throat. Could he really confess this secret for a second time, so soon after the disaster with his dad? Risk seeing that same confusion and distaste on his friend's face? But Mia was looking at him with such openness, such gentle concern. It tugged at the aching knot in his chest. Before he could second-guess himself, the words tumbled out. "I think I'm transgender," he blurted, bracing for impact. Thanks for watching. Check out Patreon if you want to have early access to the other parts. If not, it will be online in a couple of days.